Hello, everybody. We will go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. Just waiting for a few more people to join.
Ooh, if they're in listen only mode, we probably need to say like talk through chat, probably.
Good point, Ariel. Thank you. I'm trying to see if I can take people out. Oh.
Organizer and panelist. How do we chat to the audience? Can they chat with us?
They can. So there is a chat box on the right. If anyone else has a pop-up, you should be able to chat in there. It's also a question.
Hey guys, everybody can hear us.
All right, thank you everyone for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started since we are at noon Central Time. For those of you who do not know, I am Jessica Pierce. I am on the marketing team here at StatLab, and we are so grateful to have you guys join us today for Get a Grip. Let's talk about adhesion slides. With the addition of Kinettle Glass in 2023, StatLab now is a manufacturer of premium adhesion and non-adhesion slides. And our slide manufacturing team in Germany has been manufacturing glass slides and cover glass for just over 30 years. And over the past year, our StatLab team has been testing and working really hard to ensure our customers and you guys have the best access to the best slides possible, which you're going to hear a little bit more about today. So I'm sure all of you have thought at some point, which is probably why you joined the webinar, if you're doing something wrong during staining or when you run into inconsistent stain results. And we're here to tell you it's probably not you, it's most likely your slide. So today we are going to walk you through the different types of adhesion slides and learn the key differences in adhesion properties, how adhesion affects background staining, and how choosing the right slide for your specific applications can impact your results. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat or during the call. I think I see a question box and a chat box in your panel, your GoToWebinar panel. So please feel free to utilize that. And then I would love to introduce you guys to our experts, Rachel Finn, who is a certified histotech and StatLab product marketing specialist, and Ariel Hobson, our slide product manager with vast experience in slide properties and testing. I will pass it on over to Rachel first to introduce herself and give her a little bit background on who she is. And then we can leave a little bit room at the end of the call for questions. So I will hand it on over to you, Rachel.
Hey, hi everyone. Like Jessica said, my name is Rachel Finn, and I am a certified histotech. I have been for a little over 13 years. And my background is mostly in hospital labs. I was a tech and then also histology supervisor. And then I moved on to StatLab, where I started in the product support department. So I supported all the customers with any product, any staining protocols, anything at all that they needed assistance with. And I am now the product marketing specialist for StatLab. So I'm able to help write a lot of the product content, product training, just anything like that that's product related. Just a little bit else about me. These are like the most important things to me, my family, football, and my friends. So I just have one son, he's 20 years old, and he actually works at StatLab as well. So we've definitely kept it in the family. This is also my favorite time of year because it's all football, whether it's college or NFL. So I spend most of my weekends watching a lot of football. And then also just having fun with friends, whether it's going out to eat, going to the beach, or doing whatever we can just to have fun. So that's a little bit about my background. Pass it to Ariel to tell us a little bit about herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ariel Hobson. I'm a product manager at StatLab. I represent our glass, our slide, and our stains portfolio. You can see a little bit on the right, a little bit about what I do. I've been to our glass facility in Germany, met all the wonderful folks, seen the robotics, learned about what makes glass matter, and there's a lot of stuff that we're going to share with you today. You can see also, if anyone was at NSH this year, and they might have seen StatLab's parade that we made through when we launched a new product line. I was leading that parade. I was very excited to be able to lead that band and have some fun, celebrate the New Orleans culture, and really just kick off our product launch. To the left, you'll see what I do outside of work, my family. I have 2 beautiful children, and we are on the go constantly. You can see that on that far right picture where we're at a baseball game or a recital, and water bottles and dressed appropriately every single chance we can get. We are on the go, living life to the fullest. So that's just a little bit about me. We are so glad that y'all are here today talking about slides. It's a very huge passion of ours. We very strongly believe that glass matters. And I just want to talk to you guys, give you another overview of what we want to talk about. Next slide. First thing we want to talk about, we want to tackle common challenges when working with adhesion slides, get a clear understanding of how different slide properties can impact various applications. And then also at the end of the day, we want to make sure you guys feel confident making a change or continuing to stay with the perfect slide for your lab's needs. A lot of people will ask, which slide do I go with? There are a lot of different variables that can impact that. Every single lab has different needs. They work with different types of tissue, different staining, different equipment. You've got to find the right one just for you. And we want to hopefully talk through all the different options and help you get a good option moving forward. Next slide. So one of the first things we wanted to start off with is kind of some troubleshooting and kind of talk through a little bit about some of the challenges that we see commonly with slides. So on your screen, I hope everyone can see, this is some H&E staining on some slides. And has anyone, feel free to put it in the chat, has anyone ever gotten an H&E slide like that where, yeah, that tissue is well stained, but clearly there's some excess background staining, a lot of hematoxylin. So Rachel, have you ever seen something like that in your history in the lab? And if you encounter that, what are some common things to look for to kind of maybe clean that up a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I have seen it in the lab. One thing I know, and I did learn this pretty early on, is that tomo slides are pretty notorious for picking up a lot of extra background. And I know most labs choose not to use those for H&Es. So this is an example of a tomo on an H&E and how you can see all of that excess background that's left behind. In some other instances, maybe you haven't used an acid rinse or maybe not used it long enough to clean off some of that background on the slide. So that's something that could possibly be tried. But like I said, with the tomos or with other slides, it just may be the nature of the slide that unfortunately it holds on to some of that background and you just can't get rid of it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Ooh, silver stains, GMS, a lot of different silvers. We've got a couple of slides that in front of you on that sheet. Looking at, the tissue there, it looks like probably maybe they're looking for some fungus, and those are GMS stained slides that we did back in our lab in McKinney. You can see they have varying levels of silver, of gray. Those slides are a little bit gray tinted in various levels. And Rachel, what's one of the things that you've noticed, special stains are one of your favorites to work with. How do you get rid of that excess silver on that slide?
So sometimes this can be a little more difficult. I know I used to use one of the Ventana special stainers, and sometimes it just seemed to vary depending on the kit or maybe even the type of slides that were used. With manual staining, you might be able to wipe off some of that background, but sometimes just depending on your heat settings, depending on how you've left your slides in the silver, or even depending on how old your kit might be, can cause various degrees of background staining on different slides. So these are just some examples of how much background that you may see on a silver stain.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, next slide, please. All right. Oh, tissue wash, IHC. Has anyone ever seen a lot of wash or experienced either tissue loss, tissue folding when you're doing IHC? Lost that tissue and you get that slide back and you're like, oh, I've gotta go back. Can everyone see the poll? If you are have you ever experienced tissue loss? Have you ever experienced background staining, issues with maybe a slide not working in a printer or maybe digital? But we wanted to show you guys a couple of examples, to just kind of understand what are your most common challenges in that lab. Take a few minutes and talk through it. While you guys are voting, Rachel, what are your thoughts on why you're seeing that tissue lift there?
Well, so this was something that you never want to see in a lab. You run your IHC stains and go take them off, and you see that half of your tissue is missing. You have to go talk to your pathologist or take some time to rerun that slide so that they can see what they want. Sometimes it hasn't been dried long enough. If it's a piece of breast, maybe your lab has a specific drying protocol that's a longer amount of time. Perhaps you used a slide that you don't normally use, or maybe you accidentally put it on a non-adhesion slide. There could be lots of different reasons why you might see this tissue wash or this folding. So it's just extra time that you have to go back and troubleshoot what's going on.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. So tissue loss, 84%, background staining, 16%. Very frustrating, but we are here to talk about it. So it looks like more people are definitely on tissue wash. We can talk more. Love to understand more. If you see it with certain tissues, you see it with different protocols or antibodies, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but thanks for participating in that poll. Next slide. This might be a little bit newer. I think a lot of labs are really starting to adopt digital pathology. And when you adopt new pieces of equipment, new technology, there are new challenges that can sometimes arise. Rachel, what are you seeing here?
So this is fairly new to me as well. And this was a piece of tissue that when I was just looking around the slide, I saw this area that looked like maybe there was some excess mounting media that was left on there. Maybe it wasn't dried quite as well. But just an area that we couldn't quite really see what was going on in that piece of tissue. So maybe it was as simple as having to rescan it again, or this might be a situation where you have to go back and look at the tissue, maybe microscopically, and go back and recut and restain and start over as well.
Interesting. Yeah, you never know what you're going to find out. So next slide. Common troubleshooting tips for adhesion, background staining. What would you recommend just to start off with if you're challenged with any of those issues?
So I think these are just some of the more common ones that you may try in the lab. Some of them I've already touched on a little bit. With that tissue wash, it may be as simple as increasing that drying time for certain tissue types. Or if you have extra time that you can allow for the slides to air dry overnight and then place them in the oven for about a half an hour in the morning. But I know that a lot of labs are very, very busy and may not have the time to do that. Another thing you can always do is just to make sure there's no water trapped under the tissue. You can tap off any excess water just to make sure it's out of there before you dry it, or put it on a stainer for staining. If you're just cutting routine sections, ensure that your microtome didn't get set to a higher micron and that you're cutting them at the normal 4 microns for routine sections, unless of course your lab calls for a different. Another thing, if you're noticing a lot of tissue wash, just make sure that if you are using an adhesion slide, that you're not adding any additives or gelatin to that water bath. This can kind of counteract the adhesion and cause it to work as well. And then another thing, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes, is if you're using hydrophobic or hydrophilic adhesion slides. This can affect how you pick up those tissue sections. Doesn't necessarily affect the type of adhesion or if it's a stronger adhesion or not, but we'll get into a little more detail about that in a minute.
Yep. Thanks, Rachel. So those are some common troubleshooting tips, but what happens if you're still having issues with adhesion? Are all slides created equal? Are all adhesion slides the same? What happens if you try all these tips and tricks and still there might be excess background staining, or there just might be lift with certain types of tissue? Could it be that your slide is not optimal for that specific application? Spoiler alert, yes, it could be. So one of the things that we seek to understand is, what are the needs of your lab to help you find that perfect slide? And we're going to talk through all the different variables and factors, and then talk through a little bit more about what other things you can use to find that perfect slide. So a couple of them basic questions, what applications are you looking for? Is this just for IHC? Is it for routines? Is it for specials? What Rachel hinted at earlier, hydrophilic or a hydrophobic slide. How that slide picks up in the water bath can impact your workflow. What kind of a printer do you have? Or do you have a labeling machine? The paint that's on that slide can impact lots of other, how you're able to track that patient information adequately. Is digital pathology used in your lab? More and more labs are going to it, and they're having to change some of their consumables to accommodate the newer technologies. And then workflow. Is your lab set up to use different slides for different applications? Or are you looking for one slide to rule them all? Are you looking for one slide that can do everything? So we'll talk through more on this. Next slide. Applications.
For some of the different applications, these are just some things that you might want to look for, or questions that you may want to ask in your lab to figure out what slide to use. So for an H&Es, do you choose to use a non-adhesion slide or an adhesion slide? Do you have several blocks of trickier tissues like breast or skin, maybe nail or bone, that would require an adhesion slide? Or are you able to get away with using non-adhesion since H&Es are generally less aggressive? For special stains, kind of the same thing. Do you choose to use a non-adhesion or an adhesion? Again, if you have some of those trickier tissues, then you may prefer an adhesion slide. However, if you do a lot of silver stains, some of those adhesion slides may pick up some of that background, and that may be a preference that you don't want. Does your lab do a lot of IHC? Do you prefer a hydrophilic or a hydrophobic slide? And again, on the next slide, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit more detail. Do you have several blocks, again, of those trickier tissues that are harder to stay on during IHC? So do you need a slide that has a little bit stronger adhesion? Also, which stainer do you use? There are specific slides that are recommended for each stainer, so you'll have to pay attention to that as well. And then also with digital pathology, this is a little bit newer, but you may need to look at what digital imager that you're using. And also, what kind of cover glass or cover tape are you using? Is that going to affect anything with your imaging as well? So these are questions to think about to try to start figuring out what kind of slides you need to use. And so here's a little bit more about that hydrophilic and hydrophobic. I know some techs know what this means. Others are like, I don't know, those are big words. I'm not really sure. So hydrophilic, this is a water-loving slide. So the water, all of that water wants to stay on the slide. And as you're trying to get that tissue section onto it, you almost have to chase that piece of tissue through the water. You may need forceps to anchor the slide or to anchor the tissue to the slide. But the good thing about this is you can also reposition that tissue section quickly. Maybe you didn't get it quite on the slide where you wanted it, so you can place that slide right back in the water and reposition it to where you want it. And so the key thing to remember with a hydrophilic is that you have to kind of chase that tissue. With a hydrophobic slide, this is a water repelling slide, almost like a raincoat. So as you place that slide into the water, it's trying to push all the water away from the slide, which means that that tissue section kind of jumps onto that slide and adheres very easily and very quickly. So for a lot of techs, especially with high volume labs, this allows you to pick up more slides in less time. So this may be an option for your lab. But when you use a hydrophobic slide, once that tissue section is stuck onto the slide, it's much more difficult to be repositioned. It's stuck on there pretty good, and it doesn't want to come off. So that's just a little bit about the differences between a hydrophilic or a hydrophobic slide.
Okay. Printers, labeling and tracking. How do we put that patient information so that we can connect that person or that animal or sample to the tissue? So common printers out there that you see, an inkjet printer like the Leica IPS, or a thermal transfer printer like the StatLab PiSmart printer, the previous slide mate or ESPO. You can see pictures and images of how the print on that paint looks different depending on how you're labeling and tracking. Newer printers tend to be or are often laser printers. You know, at NSH this year, we saw lots of laser printers, UV laser printers. It almost scrapes the paint off and leaves the glass clear to convey the patient information or that barcode. An IR laser printer is up top, and it actually burns, turns the paint a different color. So there are different types of paint that you can mix and match. You just need to make sure that you're choosing the right paint for however you guys are labeling and tracking. Next slide. So all of that together, the anatomy of a slide, there's paint, glass, that's going to impact it as well between quality, uniformity, and composition. Slide separator dots, which down at the bottom, sometimes they're dots, sometimes they're plus signs, sometimes they are check marks. They help make sure that the slide is even going through a printer or a stainer, and it acts as a barrier and a separator so they don't stick together. Far and away, the biggest difference and the biggest impact a slide has is the adhesive coating. All different kinds of coatings go on that slide, and they all kind of give that slide a different characteristic. Those different characteristics manifest in how that slide, the tissue, how the water bath behavior, does it jump, does it chase, how it works in particular stainers, and then also if it's going to pick up background staining. So that adhesion is really truly the biggest differentiator on that slide. And with that, we'll continue talking about the adhesion and how that impacts the slide and what matters for you. Next. So how do you know what that right slide is? Here at StatLab, we have a fantastic product support team that investigates concerns, questions, troubleshooting really, really seriously. And especially if one of our customers calls in, emails, tells us, flags us, says, hey, we've got an issue with adhesion, or we're seeing a lot of excess background, what's going on? We investigate. We take it very, very seriously, not only because we want, happy customers, happy people that will continue to feel confident in the products that we are selling, but also because it's a patient care issue. And we take that very, very seriously. That is the ultimate piece of tissue information that slide holding onto, or the background muddying up, that can impact the quality of care. So as soon as we have a concern, it gets brought in, and we stress test different slides. We want to double check and make sure that maybe, is this something that could be widespread, or is it isolated? And we tested a bunch of different ways. We test for adhesion. We double check it for water bath behavior, background staining, and printer compatibility. We want to make sure that that slide is functioning as accurately and as intended as possible. And here's one thing, very cool. StatLab has been growing and expanding. Next slide. We have been trying to understand a little bit more how slides are, how they're made. And late last year, we purchased Kindle Glass. They've been making microscope slides for over 35 years. Well, they're one of the 5 largest manufacturers of glass for microscopes and used in the lab. They're one of the 5 largest in the world. So when Kindle joined StatLab last year, we changed from being a distributor of microscope slides to a manufacturer. And one of the first things we wanted to understand was, all right, how do these slides actually perform? What does this bring to the table? What does Kindle have? What do we have? What does our competition have? How do we become the world's leading manufacturer of microscope slides and cover glass? I like data and facts and test results. So we set off on a mission to understand the slides that StatLab sells, all of our slides, the slides that Kindle makes, and then also how a lot of the slides that you guys might use in your lab that maybe you don't purchase from StatLab, but you're using from some of your distributor partners or direct from someone else. How do they perform? How do we create the best slide ever? Next slide. And there's a picture of slides being made in Braunschweig. So I hinted at it earlier. We put together a study. We wanted to test these slides. We stress test them. We gathered all of our slides. We worked with our teammates in Texas, in the UK, and also in Germany to study them and put them through a series of different tests, how you would use them in your lab. So can we test them for adhesion? Can we test them for background staining? How do they truly pick up in that water bath? We presented this poster earlier this year at NSH. We put it in the attachment here for this webinar, and we'll absolutely send it out to you guys as well too, so you can check out the findings that we have. Yes, this paper factually shows how different slides are crafted and how they impact what you're doing in that lab. We saw the biggest differences in adhesion slide performance with IHC tissue wash and background staining. And you know what? No surprise, when we did that poll earlier today, that's exactly what you guys said too. Tissue wash, background staining, 2 biggest concerns. Well, we're here to tell you there's a reason why. So next slide. So just a little bit more about what we tested. We tested IHC. We were looking for adhesion. We looked at stainers. For H&Es, we looked at reagent coverage, making sure that reagent went all over the slide so that some tissue didn't get left off. We were looking at background staining. We measured background staining with a fancy tool called a spectrophotometer. We looked at special stains. We tested in the water bath. We measured contact angles, which is something that we look at to ensure that the adhesive coating is actually applied evenly across that slide, but also to see how that impacts the water bath and how it picks up. So we looked at a lot of different things. Where we found the biggest differences is in IHC tissue adhesion. And I'm going to go into a little bit more depth here because this is really where the biggest differences we're seeing. Next slide. Okay, so with IHC testing, we split it up. We know that IHC testing is one of the trickiest things that a lab can do, and also the most impactful. We think we split up the tissues that we tested. We tested about 100 different tissues per slide brand that we looked at. We tested them with easy tissues like lymph, appendix, spleen, or kidney. We had some medium difficulty tissues like lung, foreskin, placenta, cervix, or colon. And then we also stress test them and said, all right, let's see how you do with the hard stuff, skin, fat, breast. So we tested them. We used all of the exact same procedures. We tested them alongside each other using the exact same protocols so that we made sure that they were all in the exact same environment, handling the same things to say, all right, can you hold on to this tissue? And then we measured and we looked at every single piece of tissue later to grade it, to say, all right, did you hold on to that tissue or did you lose it? On the right there, you can kind of see the scoring grid that we made up, and it's a scale of, did it have excellent adhesion, no tissue loss, or was it a 1? Did it lose all of that tissue where that slide is completely unreadable, undiagnosable? So we spent the bulk of our time with IHC testing because just like the poll results showed us, that's where the hardest problem is, IHC adhesion. Next slide. So what were the results? And I apologize, guys. You might hear my dog eating in the background. It's lunchtime here. So we're going to go through that. And in this graph, it's a compilation of all the slides that we tested. And we measured their results for background staining, for tissue wash. And in our minds, the ideal slide from a performance perspective, from an adhesion perspective, is no background staining, no tissue wash. And you can kind of see that up in the upper right-hand corner. Can you find a slide with incredibly high IHC adhesion, but no background staining? We found one. It is the new StatLab KT5+. Maybe your lab is interested in incredibly high adhesion, but background staining is not a concern because you've got routine staining, but you just need IHC adhesion. That Tomo had no tissue wash. It actually won our contest for the highest score for adhesion. But as you saw earlier, and you might have experienced in your lab as well too, that Tomo holds on to tissue, but also some excess reagent. So it's really best in IHC, and you can't use it everywhere in the lab. In the middle of that graph, you see a lot of slides. Some have better adhesion than others, according to our study. Some have better backgrounds than others. But the key is to kind of take a look and say, what's important to my lab? Do I want something with incredible adhesion and no background wash? Do I want something with a little bit different background, with a little bit different water bath behavior? Picking and choosing what matters most for your workflow, for your stainers, that's the most important thing you can do. But this is the culmination of this initial study. Next slide. IHC adhesion. You can see on those images to the right, we showed you a little bit of some of the images of breast tissue, the hard stuff. That IHC tissue adhesion was the true differentiator between the different brands, different product availabilities. And you can see up top that StatLab KT5+ held onto breast tissue really, really well. So did that Matsunami Tomo and also the Dako Flex slide. No surprise, those are IHC specialty slides, and they can do exactly what they say they do. They hold on to that tissue really, really well. In the middle of that image, you'll see a slide that is an image of breast tissue, the same tissue, and that's a Superfrost Plus slide. And you can see that, Rachel, what do you see? I see folds, I see loss, a lot of different things going on there.
Yeah, I see some tissue wash. If I were to pull this off of the stainer, it would have been a little bit, honestly, I would have been a little bit upset because that means that I need to spend more time, probably maybe to recut that slide or pull an unstained slide and run that stain again. I know if I hand that to my pathologist, he's probably going to say, what happened to the rest of this tissue? What if there's an area of concern in one of the areas that kind of washed off? And so another stain is probably going to need to be rerun just to get the best diagnosis possible.
Thanks, Rachel. Mm-hmm. All right. Next slide, please. So you hinted at this a little bit, where if you have to go recut and restain that slide, if you lost the tissue, if there was fold, you cannot give that to a pathologist. They can't make a diagnosis with it. We looked in our study at a repeat rate. We called it the failure rate or repeat rate. What does that mean for a lab? Does anyone else have issues with repeat rates? Feel free to use that chat. In some other studies that we've seen, the cost $80 a slide for a failed IHC slide. So when you factor in the cost of labor and time and the expensive antibodies and stains, that 20-cent slide, if that tissue is washed off of it, it costs almost $80 in rework. So I think that's something to take into, think through of what if I chose a better slide or a different slide to meet my needs so that I don't have to repeat anything there. This table shows our repeat rate, our failure rate on the different slides that we tested and how they compare with different tissue types. And you can see that Matsunami Tomo, the Daco Flex, the StatLab KT5 Plus had the lowest rates. That's your best bet for IHC. Some of those slides down at the bottom, probably not so good. You might have to do a lot of extra compensating to figure out how not to lose that tissue. Or other slides there might not be best for IHC. They work great for holding on to special stains, like for nail, if you're a derm lab, but for other difficult tissues might not be the best there. Next slide. Background staining. So another big differentiator that we see from our history in the lab, and then also the poll earlier where you guys said that background staining is a big concern, is you can take a look there on the right. You've got 3 different slides, the StatLab KT5 Plus, the Adhesion Superfrost Plus, and that Matsunami Tomo, a GMS stain. So Rachel, tell me what you see. Again, these are all run on a commercially available stainer with new kits, fresh slides, very different results. What's going on?
These were all run together, so it wasn't like we did three different times. But these tissues were all run together. I mean, you can see the variation in background on each slide. The StatLab key doesn't show them. Superfrost shows a fair amount of impact. The patient does a pathology diagnosis. This background could just will be able to affect digital pathology. You can see that Matsunami Tomo, the background is a lot worse. Actual, or your pathologist may issue. Pathologists pick up this background instead of the actual tissue. You guys still hear me?
Yes, you're breaking up.
Okay.
I'll jump in because I don't know if anybody else hear that. So same slide, same piece of tissue, same protocol, same stainer, very different results. You can see, JP, can you hear me and add that into the chat just so we can confirm that everything is a-okay from an audio standpoint. You can see that StatLab KT5 Plus has vibrant staining and no excess silver stain. That's a GMS. One of the common offenders with background staining in silvers is that GMS stain. In the middle is the Adhesion Superfrost Plus. The tissue is stained, but there is just a little bit of extra silver left behind. Excessive background staining can be problematic, and it can be problematic in a couple ways. Number one, I think a lot of people, you want that slide to look beautiful. Special stains especially look like a work of art. And sometimes that background staining can interfere with the aesthetic of it. And sometimes pathologists can view it as a sign of sloppy work. So it's just something that if you can clean that slide up, it's better. You can especially see the excess background that Tomo side. There's a lot of silver left on. So in addition to being problematic with sloppy excess background, We're also hearing reports that excess background staining can interfere with digital pathology. As more and more labs adopt digital and they've adopted AI, there's only so much that intelligence can pick up. It might see that silver and go and try and pick up a piece of that excess silver stain and interfere with the image that's being shown, and maybe not pick up the actual tissue as well too. So you can see there, they're same protocols, same piece of tissue, same stainer, same run, very different results. It's not you, it's your slide if you're getting something like that. Next slide. So that's kind of our initial study, our initial comparison with adhesion testing that we presented at NSH, and after that study and kind of in between, we're still developing slides. We're still on a mission to create the best slide possible with the highest levels of adhesion with minimal background staining. We bought a new Ventana to double check and make sure that Ventana is the most popular IHC stainer out there. And we wanted to make sure that we can confirm and see what a lot of you guys are seeing out there in your labs too. We're looking for superior adhesion and low background staining as we test, because we're manufacturing these ourselves now. Okay, next slide. All right, a few other pieces of information. I wanted to share a sneak peek at some of the testing that we're seeing on that Ventana benchmark. We went back to our stress test, our most difficult tissue. It's a block of breast tissue. I know a lot of folks have been touched by breast cancer in their lives. There are so many Americans that get diagnosed every year. So there's constantly lots of breast tissue being run and diagnosis looking to be made. So this is the same exact block of breast tissue and run side by side simultaneously. Same protocols. You can see both that Tomo and the StatLab KT5 Plus maintain tissue integrity post staining, but we did not see that with that Superfrost Plus slide that there's a lot of fold, there's a lot of loss, and more than likely, if that was happening in a lab and you got that back, it would probably result in going to have to recut, restain that slide, and Rachel, I don't know if you've got audio back and better connection at the same time. But thinking through that, and if you had that slide there where it's folded, it's lost, what's the result? How does that impact you?
I mean, again, I think that the biggest impact would be, for me, it would be the time. If I didn't have a recut already cut on that slide, then I would need to take the time to go back and recut it. Take some time to dry it again. I would probably increase the drying time this time, and then have to rerun that stain. So that would be the biggest impact for me personally. For the patient, it's a huge impact if the area of concern is in that area.
Oh no, I think we've lost.
How do I know that that's going to be the same in another piece of tissue? Liz?
We're losing you again.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you're going in and out. And you were right in the middle of talking about the impact of that tissue in the patient.
No.
Go ahead. I know. What happens if that was the area of interest in that particular patient tissue? There are only so many cuts of tissue available sometimes. Sometimes your samples are really, really small. And if you're having tissue wash, it's problematic from a workflow, it's problematic for money, for time, a delayed diagnosis, but there's always that impact to patient care. And you want to make sure that you're getting the best look at what those problem areas is possible. So I think the impact to patient care, when I see things, when we hear about tissue loss, that makes me concerned, because that could be me, that could be my mom, That could be my aunt or someone else that I love and know very, very well. So I think tissue is it's a precious item, especially what they're looking at to try and figure out what's going on and what they can heal. So I think more to come on our IHC testing and what we can share. Hopefully we'll have a larger, more robust study to share with you on it, but wanted to give you guys that sneak peek. Next slide. So in conclusion, we've thrown lots of information at y'all today. We've shown a little bit of all the different factors that can weigh into how a slide performs in your lab, how they perform, side by side. And I think the result is that not all slides are created equal. And I think it's really important to understand the difference in adhesion and what's most important for you in your lab. And I think the best way for most folks to do that is to test them out in your own lab with your own protocols, with your own trainers, with your processes, because you can kind of find and see exactly what meets your needs. Okay, next slide. So how do you choose the right slide? How do you, if you're looking for something different, if you're looking for something new, how do you choose the right one? First thing, get samples. Get samples from where you think might be a good option. From, you can talk to sales reps, you could talk in the industry. Maybe you have some other friends who are histotechs at other labs. What do they use? What have they had good experiences with? What hasn't worked out well? What does? So get those samples and try them out. See how they work, and then compare the results. Do a side by side, just like what we've shown earlier. Hold those slides, put them in the same protocols, see how they perform in the same environments, and see if you can see differences, or if you still need to take a look at something new. So with that, so how do you get samples? How do you test? What are my options? StatLab is here to help. So not sure which slides to choose? We've got a tool for that for you. So we're debuting a new slide finder tool today. You can find it on our website. You can click the link. We'll send a follow-up email with a link to this slide finder tool. You answer a few questions about how those slides are used in your lab. So a couple of the quick questions that we talked about earlier in the presentation about printer compatibility, about the applications that are being used, and how you like to pick up slides in the water bath. Take this quick quiz. It takes about 30 seconds, and we can suggest a slide for you and see if you like it, and then send you a free sample to check it out in your lab as well too. So happy to shoot that out. Look for an email from StatLab after this webinar closes out, and check out that slide finder tool. So I think we are at the end of our presentation, or very close to it. Again, we talked a little bit about this when I saw the tissue loss, and it impacts me personally. I've been touched by cancer in my family's life, and it drives me to make sure that we are making the best possible products for you guys to use in your lab. Here at StatLab, it is our mission, our heartbeat. We want to give you the best possible things to provide the best patient care possible. And glass is one of those things. Glass matters. It impacts the stain that's on that slide. We are happy to be a part of that fight against cancer. So thank you guys so much for your time today. Thanks for your participation. Thank you for listening. I think, Jess, can we open it up for questions or comments for the audience?
Yes, absolutely. So if you guys can find your question or your chat box, feel free to pop in any comments, any helpful tips, any questions that you have, and we can take this the rest of this time to answer those questions. And while you guys are doing that, we did have a question come in from Juan asking what kind of slide would be best to use for toenails. I know you guys were kind of talking about some of the harder tissues are better for those higher adhesions or tissue wash. Do you guys have any, or anybody else on the call too, anybody have any suggestions for best slides for toenails or nails?
Rachel, is your audio working? I know what I would say, but
maybe.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'll jump in.
I would say so. First question on that for the toenail: Are you doing special stains on it? I would assume, or what kind of testing are you doing on it? I would probably immediately pivot to the new StatLab KT5 Plus. Toenail is incredibly tricky. You're definitely going to need an adhesion slide for that nail. But especially kind of depends as well too. We have great options in our adhesion slide portfolio, but you definitely want one that's incredibly sticky because that hard, the keratin nature of a toenail is incredibly tricky, especially through, tough processing. So that would be my first thing. I would say check out that StatLab KT5 Plus or the KT3 Plus. A little bit dependent on how you're staining. Is it going through for specials? Is it going through for other things? Probably for specials. I don't know if one is still there in padding, but I would probably suggest starting there. It holds on to tissue incredibly well, but it also has minimal background staining. Yes. High adhesion slide, like the StatLab KT5 Plus Advanced Adhesion Slide. Absolutely, and happy to send you a sample for you to check it out in your own lab as well too. If you can share details, or if you want to respond out to the email that we'll follow up with. Yep. Right.
Wonderful.
What else do we have? Slide Finder
Yes.
tool. Any other questions out there? Slides to use for toenail. Let's see.
And if not, you guys have questions that come up later, you are always welcome to reach out to us. You can respond to the email that we will send out later. We'd be happy to answer any questions that come up after the fact as well.
Absolutely. I think next slide. If you guys have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Rachel. Again, she is a certified histotech. She's been in the lab, worked in the lab for many years. She is a powerful resource. She's great at troubleshooting different scenarios and super helpful. Her email address is there. Mine is there as well too. Again, thank you guys so much for joining. Please let us know if you have questions. And thank you so much again for spending your Wednesday lunchtime with us talking about slides and how they matter.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Ariel. And thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of your week and a happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
It won't quit.